They laughed when I gave them a handmade gift and said, "Just send money next time." I smiled, handed them an empty envelope, and walked away. No one followed me. My hands were still trembling when I reached the porch, even though I walked slower than usual. The winter air had lost its bite, but I still felt cold, right in the middle of my chest, where people say the heart lives. I had spent 3 weeks crocheting that blanket for Abby, picking colors that reminded me of her childhood drawings, blue and coral and pale lilac. She used to love those. I thought maybe she still did. Apparently not. "It's sweet, Mom," Helen said, patting the blanket like it was something a kindergartner made. Then she turned to Abby and whispered, not quietly enough, "We'll just fold it and store it with the others." And then Jack, my son-in-law, had to make his little joke. "Next time, Margaret, just send money. Save yourself the trouble." Abby giggled. My own granddaughter, 19. I suppose she thought it was harmless. So I smiled. That old, soft smile I'd practiced over the years. The one that makes people think you're not offended. I reached into my handbag and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. "This is for you all," I said, handing it to Jack. He opened it. It was empty. "I figured I'd save myself the trouble," I said. I turned, walked toward the coat rack, and put on my jacket. Slowly, carefully. My hands always shook a bit when I was angry, and I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing it. Helen said something behind me. I didn't hear what. I didn't care. Outside, the wind had picked up. The driveway was lined with gray puddles that reflected a sky full of thick, low clouds. My old Buick stood alone like a faithful dog. I walked to it without looking back. They didn't come after me. I sat in the car for a while before turning the key. The engine took a second start. I let the heater run, but it didn't help much. Something else had gone cold. What hurt wasn't the joke. I'd been around long enough to handle jokes. It was the dismissal, that soft, slippery thing that creeps in over years. When your presence becomes optional, your words become background noise, and your efforts are met with polite indifference. I hadn't always made handmade gifts. There were years when I brought turkeys, wrote checks, helped pay off Helen's hospital bills after Abby's birth. Nobody asked then if the gift was useful. It was. I paid to keep the lights on. I helped them get through. And now they want me to just send money next time. I pulled out of the driveway slowly, careful not to spray their lawn with the wet grit that collected at the curb. It would have been satisfying, but petty. I'm not petty. I was a mother, a wife, a woman who raised a daughter through her husband's drinking and her own 2 jobs. I didn't have time for petty. The drive home felt longer than usual. The trees lining Belmont Avenue were bare, brittle. I used to love this road in the fall when it turned gold. But now, everything looked like it had gone quiet and decided not to come back. I pulled into my own driveway. Small, cracked, a little tilted from the roots of the sycamore near the fence. The porch light flickered when I unlocked the door. Inside, the smell of lemon oil and wool greeted me. I had cleaned yesterday. You never want to come home to a messy house after visiting people who see you as unnecessary. I hung up my coat, poured myself a cup of tea I didn't want, and sat at the kitchen table. That envelope had been meant to hold a check. I wrote one, originally, $500 for Abby's spring break fund. She'd mentioned it once in a phone call. I thought it'd be nice. But after the blanket, after the giggles, I reached into my purse, took out the check, and ripped it in half. I kept the envelope. That I handed over. and not a single one of them noticed the change. I took a sip of cold tea. There was a faint hum in the pipes. Somewhere in the back of the house, a branch tapped the bedroom window. My hands had stopped shaking. I felt very calm. I stood up, walked to the secretary desk in the hallway, and opened the bottom drawer. There it was, a file labeled Helen Expenses. Neatly arranged, year by year. Receipts, scans of checks, notes from the times I helped. Hospital, car repair, down payment, private school, camp. Each one of them folded with care, each one a reminder. I flipped through until I found the spreadsheet I had printed 2 summers ago when I started organizing things for my will. There, in neat columns, date, amount, purpose. The total at the bottom made me pause. And then I smiled. Not the soft, practiced smile. A different one. One I hadn't felt in a long time. I closed the file, carried it to the kitchen, and laid it beside my tea. Then I reached for the phone. Tomorrow, I would call the bank. The phone was still warm in my hand, even though the call hadn't happened yet. I just sat there, palm resting on the receiver, as if waiting for permission to move. But there was no one left to ask. I had spent so much of my life checking with others before making decisions. Will it be okay if I come by? Do you think it's all right if I bring something? Is this too much? Too little? The questions women like me learn to ask from girlhood. Out of courtesy, out of fear, out of survival. But this time, I wasn't asking. I reached over and unplugged the electric kettle, which had been quietly buzzing from the last boil. I hadn't even noticed it. My thoughts were too loud. The spreadsheet still lay open beside the tea. It wasn't the total amount that shocked me. I'd known, vaguely, that I'd given a lot over the years. But seeing it in one column, one undeniable number, gave the gift a weight I hadn't acknowledged before. $172,430, spread over 2 decades. Quietly, steadily. Not counting groceries, last-minute babysitting, or the time I gave Helen my car and told everyone it was a temporary arrangement. I folded the sheet gently and placed it back in the folder. No bitterness, just precision. It was time to remember what had happened, not how I felt about it, not what I wanted it to mean, but what had actually taken place. What had actually taken place was this. I had shown up at my daughter's house with a handmade gift. I had been laughed at. Not maliciously, maybe, but certainly without care. And then I had walked away. Now I intended to continue walking. In the hall closet, I found my old ledger, the black one I used back when I helped run our family hardware store before George got sick. I pulled it out and began a new section in the back. The top of the page I labeled, Resources Moving Forward. Underneath that, in capital letters, for me. It felt ridiculous at first, childish even, but the act of writing those words, for me, struck something deep. For once, it wouldn't be for Helen, not for Jack and his endless ventures, not for Abby and her college wish list, not even for the family, just for me. I wrote down what I had in savings, roughly, what I might get from the pension this year, a list of subscriptions I could cancel, a few things I might sell, the treadmill gathering dust in the guest room, the 3 sets of holiday dishes I hadn't used since 2010. And then I added another line, like a whisper to myself, the right to say no. I sat back and stared at it, the most valuable thing I still owned. There was a knock at the door around noon, not Helen, of course. Just the mailman, dropping off catalogs and a water bill. But the sound had stirred something in me, a memory, of when Helen was 9, and I had made her a birthday dress. It was pink and full-skirted, with a little white collar. She had twirled in it for an hour. "You made this, Mommy? With your own hands?" Her voice had been full of wonder. I don't know when that wonder left her. Maybe when she met Jack. Maybe before. Maybe that's what growing up does. It dries the amazement right out of people. But it hadn't dried out of me. Not yet. I stood and walked to the bedroom. My knees ached a little. They always did around this time of year. But I moved with purpose. There, in the bottom drawer of my bureau, was a cedar box. Inside, my small collection of letters, keepsakes, and the ring George gave me on our 25th anniversary. A garnet, surrounded by tiny, imperfect diamonds. Not expensive, but chosen with such care. I slipped it on. I hadn't worn it in years. Back in the kitchen, I sat again, the phone beside me. I took a deep breath, then dialed the number for the bank. The line rang 3 times before a polite voice answered. "Good afternoon. This is Melody at Eastern Trust. How can I help you?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "My name is Margaret Bloom. I'd like to cancel some automatic transfers and schedule a consultation." "Of course, Mrs. Bloom. I can help with that. May I ask what types of transfers you're referring to?" "Family support. Personal transfers I set up years ago. I no longer wish to continue them." There was a pause. "I understand. I can suspend them for now, and we can finalize everything when you come in." "Thank you. I'd like to come in tomorrow morning." "Absolutely. I'll put you down for 9:30. Anything else I can help with?" "Yes," I said, almost an afterthought. "Can you also check if I've named anyone with account access or power of attorney?" She typed for a moment. "Yes, ma'am. You have 1 active authorization, your daughter, Helen Carter. Would you like to revoke that?" I looked out the window. The sky had cleared. A band of light had cut through the clouds and landed on the neighbor's fence, the same fence George helped build when their old Labrador kept escaping into our yard. "Yes," I said. "Revoke it." Another pause. "Understood, Mrs. Bloom. We'll prepare the documents for you to sign in person." After I hung up, I sat still for a long time. I felt no elation, no anger, just a strange, settled quiet. The kind that comes not after a storm, but before. The kind that says, "You've changed course." The next morning, I woke up before the alarm. My room was still dark, but I could feel it. That slight charge in the air when you know the day is going to be different. I lay there for a moment, watching the slow crawl of dawn through the curtains. No aches yet. No regret either. Just a quiet certainty in my chest. At 7:15, I boiled eggs, made toast, and poured a cup of black coffee. I didn't want breakfast, but I needed the routine. Something about slicing the toast in even halves made me feel steady, in control. I wore my gray slacks and the soft cardigan with elbow patches. The one George used to tease me about. Said it made me look like a retired professor. I smiled at the thought. He never did mind when I made my own decisions, even the hard ones. By 8:45, I was sitting in the bank parking lot, watching the early birds file in, mostly men in suits, a few younger women clutching lattes, talking too loudly into phones. I waited until the clock read 9 were sharp, then stepped out of the car. Inside, the bank was warm, clinical. Melody, the young woman I'd spoken to yesterday, greeted me with practiced cheer. "Mrs. Bloom, right on time." She led me into a small office with glass walls and offered me tea, which I declined. I wasn't here to be soothed. "We've suspended all active transfers as requested," she began, opening a folder with a neat summary. Would you like to review them before final cancellation? I nodded, and she slid the papers across the desk. There it was in black and white. Monthly transfers to Helen's mortgage, quarterly deposits into Abby's education fund, Jack's business loan repayments that never came back, but somehow I still serviced the interest. Cancel all of them, I said. All right, we'll require a signature on each page. I signed carefully, without rush. Each name I saw brought a memory, some warm, some sharp. But I didn't stop. And this, Melody said, placing a new document in front of me. Revocation of power of attorney. Once signed, your daughter will no longer have access to any of your accounts. Good, I said. That's what I want. After I finished, Melody hesitated. Would you like to assign someone else? A trusted person? I thought for a moment. Not for now. If anything happens to me, the bank can follow standard procedures. She nodded and began collecting the paperwork. You'll receive written confirmation of all these changes within the week. Is there anything else you need? Yes, I said. I'd like to set up a trust account. For someone specific? For my grandson. His name is Benjamin Bloom. She smiled. That's a lovely name. He's the only one who visits without asking for something, I said quietly. And I'd like to make sure he's protected, not used as a messenger or a tool. Melody didn't ask questions. She simply took notes, walked me through the process, and promised to contact the legal department to begin formal drafting. It took just over an hour. By the time I left the bank, the morning had opened into something soft and bright. Not warm, but kind. A little breeze in the trees, a flicker of birds over the telephone wires. On the way home, I stopped by the park. The same one I used to take Helen to as a girl, where she'd scream on the swings and cry when it was time to leave. I sat on the bench and watched two toddlers fight over a toy truck. One of them gave up and waddled to his mother, who opened a bag of crackers without saying a word. Children learn early what's given, what's earned, what's owed. I stayed there for nearly an hour, just watching. Back at home, I changed into my house dress and brewed fresh tea. The quiet felt different now. Not like emptiness, but like space. Room to think. Room to remember. I walked into the spare room, the one they used to call Abby's room, though she hadn't slept here in 6 years, and opened the closet. Inside were boxes stacked neatly, each labeled in my handwriting. Winter, linens, gifts. That last one made me pause. Inside were handmade items I'd made over the years. Sweaters too big, scarves too bright, wooden toys George once helped carve, small picture frames I painted with leftover nail polish, gifts nobody ever wanted, but that I couldn't bear to throw away. I sat on the floor and took out the blanket, the one they had laughed at. It was still soft, still beautiful in its way. Crooked stitches maybe, but full of care. I folded it gently and placed it in a bag, along with a few other things. I would take them to the community center next week. There were always young mothers there, families who had little, but knew how to say thank you. That night, I didn't cook dinner. I opened a can of soup, lit a candle, and sat at the table with my tea. Not out of sadness. I just didn't feel like performing. I was done performing. The phone rang once around 7:30. I let it go to voicemail. Probably Helen. Probably wondering why the mortgage hadn't gone through. I didn't listen to the message. Instead, I walked to the living room window, pulled back the curtain, and stood there for a while. Outside, the neighbor's porch light flickered on. A cat padded across the sidewalk. The world didn't change because I'd said no, but I had. And that was enough for today. The next morning, I opened the drawer where I kept the documents. It was time to stop guessing and start remembering. Properly. Not the soft-edged memories that come when you're lying in bed, trying not to cry, but the hard ones, the ones with numbers and dates. I pulled out the folder marked Support, Helen and Family, and laid everything on the kitchen table. Receipts, copies of checks, a few handwritten notes I'd tucked away for just in case. And today was just in case. There was the first transfer, $4,000, from when Jack lost his job in 2003. Just until we get back on our feet, Helen had said. I hadn't asked for details. I just wired it that same afternoon. Then came the common $200 for Abby's braces. Helen was too embarrassed to ask directly that time. She'd said, "We're thinking of delaying the treatment," and left a silence wide enough for me to step in. I did. Again. There was the $500 gift for Helen's birthday that same year, which she said she could really use for groceries. I didn't ask questions. I just tucked the money in an envelope and handed it over during lunch. Then came the bigger ones. The $20,000 down payment for their house. The $8,500 for the kitchen remodel. Jack said it was for resale value. He even drew me a diagram on a napkin. In total, 71 checks over 18 years. None repaid. None even mentioned again. I kept turning the pages. Each one held a little betrayal. I remembered the Christmas when I offered to help buy Abby a laptop for school. And Helen told me gently, "It's sweet, Mom, but maybe we'll just add your gift to the general fund." That general fund being the family pot for presents, which I contributed to but never saw. There were dinner parties where I cooked, cleaned, and cleared plates, while Jack talked about stocks, and Helen laughed at his jokes like she was auditioning for a quieter life. And yet, I kept giving. Because I thought I was needed. I thought I was family. I thought giving meant love. But love doesn't look away when you're humiliated in front of your granddaughter. Love doesn't laugh when you give something from your hands instead of your wallet. I gathered the papers into a new folder and labeled it. Past contributions, closed. Then I reached for the small notepad I kept near the phone and wrote down just one sentence. Giving is not the same as being valued. I stared at it for a long time. Then I tore the page off and pinned it to the fridge. Let it be a reminder, not of what they did, but of what I allowed. At noon, the phone rang again. I didn't rush to answer it. I let the machine pick it up. Helen's voice came through, a little tight. "Hi, Mom. I saw the mortgage didn't go through. Not sure if there's a mix-up with the bank? Can you give me a call when you get this?" She didn't say thank you, not even in passing. Not for the last 12 years of support. Not for the trust I'd placed in her. Just a question about the money, and a tone that already expected me to explain myself. I turned the machine off. I had nothing to explain. Around 3 o'clock, I opened the hall closet again. This time, I took down a smaller box, one I hadn't touched in years. It was George's old cash book, the one he kept in the store before he got sick. I used it once or twice for notes after he passed, then packed it away when Helen said it was morbid to keep it around. Inside were some old receipts from suppliers, a few faded photographs, and one envelope, yellowed with age. I opened it. It was a letter George had written me on our 30th anniversary. Just a simple, clumsy note. He was never one for poetic language. "You're the reason we have anything at all. The reason we've made it this far. I don't say it enough, but I know what you've given up for this family. I see it, even when you think I don't." I sat down with that letter and let myself cry. Not for the humiliation, not for the money, but for how long I'd lived without being truly seen. George had seen me. That's why I never noticed when others stopped. By evening, I felt hollowed out, but clean, like something rotten had been scooped out and thrown away. I made a light dinner, then opened a blank page in my ledger. At the top, I wrote, "Next steps." And then, "Review will call. Francis, lawyer. Open trust for Benjamin inventory valuables. Cancel grocery card. Helen uses remove Helen from insurance." Each line was a step away from dependence. Not mine on them, theirs on me. And then, at the bottom, I added one more. "Remember who you are." That night, the house creaked and settled like an old ship shifting in calm waters. I sat by the window with my tea, watching the darkness slide across the street. I didn't feel righteous or proud or angry. I just felt awake. Like someone who's been underwater too long and finally breaks the surface. The phone call wasn't hard, not the way I imagined it would be. "Eastern Trust, this is Melody speaking. How can I help?" "It's Margaret Bloom again," I said. "I'd like to finalize the trust account." "Yes, of course. I have your notes right here. You mentioned setting it up for your grandson. Benjamin Bloom?" "That's right. I want the funds to be designated for education, housing, or emergency use. No one else is to have access. Not his parents. Not anyone." There was a pause, a respectful one. Then Melody said, "We can arrange that. Would you prefer it as an irrevocable trust?" "Yes, and I want it to activate on my passing or earlier if I choose, but only by my written consent." She made the arrangements, read everything back to me, and said she'd send a courier with the documents for signature. By the time we hung up, it was still barely noon. The silence in the house had changed. It wasn't thick anymore, not weighted. It was clean, like a room you finally opened the windows in. I stood in the hallway and looked at the family photos. Helen in her cap and gown, Jack holding Abby as a baby, one group shot from a Christmas long ago. Everyone smiling. I reached up, gently removed one frame, and carried it to the bedroom. I didn't throw it away. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done curating a version of my life that wasn't real. At the back of my closet was an old metal file box. Inside it, the deed to the house, copies of George's will, insurance papers, and my own first draft of a will I'd updated last in 2014, back when Abby was starting high school, back when I still believed Helen would come around. I set the documents on the dining table. Then I called Francis, our lawyer for decades. He picked up after 2 rings. "Margaret," he said, "it's been too long." "It has," I said, "but I need to make some changes." He didn't ask what kind. He knew my voice too well. "Come by Monday?" "I'd prefer sooner." "How about tomorrow morning?" "Perfect." When I hung up, I felt the way I used to feel after paying off a big bill. Lighter, steadier, ready to sleep through the night without that tightening in the chest. At 3, the mail came. Mixed in with the grocery circulars and a donation request from the firehouse was a pale blue envelope with Abby's handwriting. Inside was a thank you card. "Dear Grandma," it began in pen that looked rushed. "Thanks for the blanket. I didn't mean to seem ungrateful. It's actually really nice and warm. Sorry about the other night. Love, Abby." No mention of Jack's joke. No apology for the laugh. No sign she'd said anything to Helen. But a small note all the same. I folded it gently and tucked it into the cedar box in my room. I wasn't planning to reply, but I wasn't discarding her either. She was still young, still learning what it means to see people fully, or fail to. By evening, the house had taken on its usual hush. Outside, the wind moved softly through the hedges. Inside, I turned off the lights room by room, letting the quiet follow me like a soft shawl. The phone rang once, around 6. I didn't answer. A message beeped. Helen's voice. "Mom, I don't know what's going on, but I need you to call me. There's something wrong with the accounts, and Abby said you seemed upset at dinner. Can we talk? Please?" Her tone held a note I hadn't heard in years. Not anger, not entitlement. Uncertainty. I didn't erase the message, but I didn't return the call either. Instead, I walked into the kitchen and pulled out the good teacup, the one with the gold rim, the one I always saved for guests. I brewed a single bag of Earl Grey and sat at the table, sipping slowly. This cup was for me. It always had been. That evening, for the first time in years, I didn't double-check the locks before bed. I didn't make a list for tomorrow. I didn't reach for the bottle of sleeping pills in the drawer. I simply turned off the lamp, got under the quilt, and closed my eyes. And I slept. Deep, clean sleep. The kind that doesn't come often in old age. Not because of the body, but because of everything else. Regret. Obligation. The unfinished list of things you're supposed to tolerate. In the morning, I sat in the kitchen with a bowl of oatmeal and honey, listening to the soft hiss of the kettle. There was no anxiety in my chest, no anticipation of a knock on the door, or a phone call that would pull me back into the role I'd finally walked out of. Instead, there was calm, and quiet, and something that felt like freedom. I picked up the newspaper and actually read it, not just skimmed for obituaries or coupons. I took my time. The sun slanted across the table. Dust floated in the air like tiny dancers. The phone stayed silent all morning. No reminders from Helen. No guilt-tinged voicemails. Just silence. Around lunchtime, I baked a peach cobbler. Not because someone was visiting, not for a holiday, not because Abby requested it for a school fundraiser. I baked it because I felt like tasting something warm and sweet. I took out my good china and served a piece on the plate with the tiny lavender rim. The one Helen always said was too delicate for guests. Delicate, maybe, but strong enough for me. While the cobbler cooled, I returned to my ledger, the one I'd started earlier in the week. On a new page, I wrote in block letters. Things I've done without applause. I didn't write it out of resentment. I wasn't keeping score. I wrote it as proof. Proof to myself that I existed before the guilt. That I had done more than fill gaps and smooth edges. I wrote, paid for Helen's wedding in full, $18,000. Took care of Abby for 3 summers while they traveled. Covered 3 emergency car repairs. Sat beside George through every chemo appointment. Ran the store alone for 2.5 years. Sewed Helen's first suit for her job interview. Walked into the school to defend Abby when she was wrongly suspended. Paid for Jack's mother's funeral when they couldn't afford it. Never asked for a penny back. By the time I finished, the list filled 2 pages. I read it once, folded it, and placed it in the file labeled Legacy. I didn't need applause, but I would not erase the record. In the afternoon, I walked to the mailbox. The sky had turned a soft gray and a wind was kicking up. I wrapped a scarf around my neck and felt the slight pinch in my hip as I stepped off the porch. The old pain, but dull now. Manageable. The mail was light. A few ads, a coupon booklet, and a letter from the bank confirming the creation of Benjamin's trust. I stood in the driveway, reading it carefully. Everything was just as I'd arranged. The restrictions, the terms, the designated triggers. My signature printed clearly at the bottom. Not Helen's, not Jack's. Mine. Inside the house, I put the letter in the active folder and made myself a cup of tea. The clock said 3:12. I used to be preparing dinner by now, calculating when Jack would get off work, whether Helen would bring groceries, what Abby might eat or refuse to eat. But today, I made a sandwich. Toasted bread, a single slice of cheese. No performance, no pressure. As I sat at the table, my eyes wandered to the far corner of the room, to the sewing machine. I hadn't touched it since Abby turned 15. She used to sit beside me on Saturdays, watching with those wide, patient eyes. I stood up, walked over, and lifted the dust cover. The machine was still smooth under my fingers, familiar, ready, and so was I. It was Benjamin who knocked on my door that Saturday morning. No warning, no text. Just that light, almost shy tap I'd know anywhere. I was in the garden, pulling out the stubborn little weeds between the flagstones, when I heard it. He was taller than the last time I saw him. Not by much, but enough. 17, thin in that way boys are right before they turn into men. His hoodie was 2 sizes too big, his shoes muddy, but his smile was real. "Hi, Grandma." "Ben," I said, brushing dirt from my gloves. "Come in, sweetheart." He followed me to the kitchen, where I washed my hands and put the kettle on. He didn't say much at first, just sat at the table like he'd done 100 times before, fiddling with the chipped edge of the placemat. "I was in the neighborhood," he said finally, a little too casually. I nodded. "That why you brought my favorite lemon cookies?" He laughed, pulling the box from his backpack. "Okay, you got me." I placed the cookies on a plate and poured the tea. We didn't talk right away. We never had to. That was the thing about Benjamin. He never filled silence just to fill it. He let it breathe. After a while, he said, "Mom's freaking out." I didn't flinch. I added a bit of honey to my cup. She said something about the bank. Jack was pacing. "They think something's wrong with your accounts, but you're not calling back." "They're right," I said simply. Something changed. He looked at me, waiting. "I canceled everything, Ben. Every automatic transfer. Every quiet little support system I'd kept running like an invisible hand under their house." His mouth parted just slightly. "All of it?" "All of it." He sat back in the chair, eyes scanning the room like he was absorbing the news from the wallpaper. "I don't blame you," he said finally. I looked up. His voice was low, but steady. "They talk about you like you're a resource, not a person. I mean, they care, in their way, but their way isn't mine anymore," I finished. He nodded. "I never laughed at the blanket," he added suddenly. "I didn't know you made it until Abby said something later. I thought it was store-bought. It was that good." My chest tightened, but I didn't cry. Instead, I stood, walked to the hallway, and returned with a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "This is for you." He looked surprised, like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to open it right away. "It's okay. Go ahead." He unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a scarf. Deep navy with a dark red stripe at the end, like the ones George used to wear. "You remembered my favorite colors," he said softly. "Of course I did." He held it like it was something fragile. We sat there a while longer, talking about school, about the college applications he hadn't told his parents about yet, about a girl named Nina, who liked old movies and never made fun of his stutter. Before he left, he hugged me tight. Not a polite hug, A real one. Arms around the shoulders, chin resting near my temple. "You're the only person who listens," he whispered. And then he was gone, walking down the path in that half-grown gait that boys have before they forget how to be gentle. I stood by the window until he turned the corner. Then I sat down, took a deep breath, and felt something in my chest unlock. Not grief, not pride, just relief. Like I hadn't failed after all. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from worry, no, those nights were behind me, but from something else. A restlessness. The kind that comes when something inside you starts rearranging. I turned on the lamp and sat at the desk in the corner of my bedroom. For years, that desk had been little more than a place for utility bills, expired coupons, and birthday cards that no one opened properly. Tonight, it felt different. I took out a sheet of paper, the good kind, the one with the soft edges, and my favorite pen, and I began to write. But not to them, to myself. Dear Margaret, it's about time someone asked you how you're doing. You've spent over 4 decades showing up. As wife, mother, grandmother, fixer of things no one knew were broken. You cooked meals no one thanked you for. You paid bills they never saw. You held silence like it was your duty. You thought being good meant being needed. You thought being loved meant being useful. You were wrong. You are not a transaction. You are not a background figure in their lives, stepping forward when convenient and retreating when you've served your purpose. You are not just a grandmother. You are not just anything. You are the woman who built a home from grit and patience. The woman who stayed up nights sewing dresses and solving crises. The woman who went unnoticed, not because she was invisible, but because she was reliable. And now? Now you are done being quiet. You are allowed to ask for respect, not in return for favors, not as repayment, just because you're still here, and that's enough. You are allowed to stop giving. You are allowed to keep what's yours. You are allowed to be selfish with your peace. You are allowed to take up space. Love yourself. I set the letter aside and stared at it for a long time. Then I folded it in thirds, slid it into an envelope, and tucked it in the drawer beneath my socks. I didn't need anyone to read it. It had already done its job. By morning, the restlessness had passed. My body moved slower, always did after a night without sleep. But my mind was clear. I spent the afternoon sorting books. Not for anyone else, not to donate, just for me. I wanted to make space on the shelves for things I actually wanted to reread. The cookbooks went into a box. The parenting guides, long obsolete, went into the garage. And on the top shelf, I placed the old poetry volumes George gave me before we were married. They'd been gathering dust behind the tax folders. It was time to bring them back. That evening, I made soup. Real soup, not from a can. Lentils and carrot and rosemary, the kind that takes time but asks nothing else. When I sat down to eat, the house was quiet in a different way. Not empty, not echoing, just still. The phone rang twice that night. I didn't answer. Let them sit in the silence now. Let them wonder. This time, the silence belonged to me. They arrived unannounced. Of course they did. It was just after 11 on a Tuesday morning. I'd been outside trimming the hydrangeas when I heard a car pull up. Not the postman, not a neighbor. Helen's SUV. And Jack, stepping out behind her. She didn't bother knocking. Just opened the gate and came up the path like it was still her house, still her schedule, still her rhythm that ruled mine. I stayed by the bush, pruning shears in hand, waiting. "Mom," she said, voice flat but urgent. "We need to talk." Jack hovered behind her, his face stiff with performance. No smile, no warmth, just tension. I nodded toward the porch. "I'm listening." They exchanged glances. Helen wanted to come in. She expected it. But I didn't move toward the door. I stood where I was, among the clippings and soil. "Can we go inside?" she asked. No. The word surprised even me. Not because I didn't mean it, I did, but because it came so effortlessly. No apology, no softening, just no. Helen crossed her arms. "Fine." She exhaled sharply. "There's been a problem with the mortgage. The bank says the auto payments have been canceled." "They have," I said. "Well, why?" Jack stepped forward. "You could have at least given us notice." I looked at him. "You've had notice for 20 years. He blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said calmly, "that every time you asked for help, I gave it. Every time you didn't ask, but left space for me to offer, I filled it. Mortgage, education, groceries, vacations, car repairs, remodels, tuition, insurance, interest on Jack's failed startup." "That wasn't a failure," he started, but Helen cut him off. "Mom, if something was wrong, you should have said something, not just pulled the rug out." "Wrong?" I repeated. "You mean like being laughed at for giving a handmade gift? Like hearing, 'Just send money next time' from your husband, while my granddaughter giggles along?" Helen flushed. It was a joke. "No," I said, lowering the shears to the ground. "It was a moment of truth. Yours. And mine." She looked at Jack, then back at me. Her voice dropped into something rehearsed. "We're just concerned about you, Mom. Are you sure everything's okay? You're making big decisions all of a sudden." "I'm perfectly capable of making decisions," I said. "I've made thousands on your behalf. Quietly. Without thanks. Without asking anything back." Helen's mouth tightened. "That's not fair." "No," I said. "It's finally fair." Jack folded his arms. "So what, you're cutting us off? After all these years?" "I'm ending a contract," I said. "One none of us signed, but all of you relied on." Helen took a step closer, her voice turning brittle. "You're going to punish us by what? Hoarding your money? Giving it all to Ben instead?" I didn't answer that. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't owe one. She saw it in my eyes. "You've lost your mind," she muttered, shaking her head. This is vindictive." "No," I said softly. "This is self-respect." And for the first time in the conversation, they had nothing to say. The wind picked up. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Jack cleared his throat. "You'll regret this." I met his gaze. "I already regret what I gave without boundaries. That ends now." Helen's face hardened. She grabbed Jack's sleeve. "Come on." They turned and walked back to the car, steps stiffer than when they'd arrived. I didn't watch them drive away. Instead, I bent down and picked up the fallen clippings, one by one, and carried them to the bin. The way I used to clear the table after they left on Sundays, all their dishes half-eaten, their voices still echoing. But now, the clearing was for me. This time, I chose what stayed. Francis greeted me at the office door with the same half-smile he'd had for decades, one part lawyer, one part old friend. "Margaret," he said, extending a hand, "you look determined." "I am." His office smelled faintly of cedar and something older, paper maybe. The place hadn't changed since the 90s. Same wooden blinds, same framed degrees, Same dusty photo of his golden retriever on the windowsill. I sat across from him and placed the folder on the desk. I'm ready to change the will? Francis nodded, already pulling out the updated template. All right. I have your previous version here. Everything's still going to Helen and Abby, correct? No, I said. Not anymore. He paused. All right. Who are the new beneficiaries? I looked him in the eye. Benjamin. And a few institutions. A shelter. A library. The Historical Society, if they'll have it. He didn't react, just started writing. No conditions, I added. No letters of apology required. But no access for Helen. Not through him. Not at all. Francis nodded. Understood. And the house? Leave it to Ben if he wants it. If not, it can go to auction. But I don't want Jack's name anywhere near it, not even in conversation. Francis allowed himself a small smile. Noted. We went through the paperwork line by line. It wasn't emotional. It was administrative, like spring cleaning for the soul. When we finished, he handed me the pen. Are you sure? He asked, as the lawyer always must. I didn't hesitate. Absolutely. I signed. He notarized. That was it. My entire life rewritten in 20 pages and 2 signatures. As I stood to leave, Francis reached into his drawer and pulled out a folder. I kept something, he said. A letter George left with the first version of your will before he got sick. He asked me to give it to you someday if I felt the time was right. I took it slowly, hands suddenly unsteady. At home, I didn't open it right away. I made tea first. I sat in the same chair I'd nursed George in when the pain got bad, when the words ran out. And then, carefully, I unfolded the envelope. Maggie, it began. Only he called me that. If you're reading this, you've probably done something brave. Something no one else noticed, but I knew you would. You always did what was hard. I hope you're doing it again, not for me, not for them, but for you. I didn't finish the letter in one sitting. I folded it, set it beside my tea, and sat very still. For the first time in many years, I felt like I had someone beside me again, not to rescue me, just to witness. That night, I slept without a single dream. And when I woke the next morning, the sun had shifted just a little further across the bedroom wall, the quiet sign of time moving, yes, but also of something better, a life beginning to tilt, finally, toward balance. Lorraine showed up with lemon bars and that look on her face, the one that meant she'd heard something. She didn't wait to be invited in, just stepped across the threshold like she had every right, which she did. We'd been friends since 1978, when she caught me crying in the grocery store over a jar of pickles. George had forgotten our anniversary, and I hadn't said a word. Not to him, not to anyone. But Lorraine saw it anyway. She always did. I heard Helen came by, she said now, setting the Tupperware on the table. She did. And I didn't let her in. She smiled then, not smug, just satisfied, like something long overdue had finally happened. Well, praise be. We sat in the kitchen, the clock ticking quietly above the stove. I poured tea. She cut the lemon bars. Nothing dramatic, just 2 older women sharing space in the silence after a storm. You look better, she said after a while. Do I? Less haunted. More you. I shrugged. I don't know who that is anymore. She sipped her tea. Maybe that's the whole point. Maybe you get to decide now. We didn't talk about money. Lorraine had always kept her opinions on Jack and Helen quiet, until now. You know, she said, I was always afraid you'd never draw the line, that you'd die with a polite smile and a depleted account, Would've, maybe, I said. But something snapped. No, she corrected. Something healed. I nodded, slow. That was closer to the truth. We talked about ordinary things after that. A new neighbor down the street, the pothole near the pharmacy, the bird feeder she hung last week. It felt good to speak without explaining, without being pulled back into roles I didn't want anymore. When she left, I stood at the porch and watched her walk down the path. She turned back once. "Don't answer if they call," she said. "Let 'em sit in their mess." I smiled. "You think I've come this far to go soft now?" She winked. "Just checking." After she left, I went back inside and opened the sewing cabinet. The navy fabric was still folded from last week. I ran my hand over it slowly. I didn't want to make anything for them. Not anymore. But I did want to make something. For me. A new curtain for the kitchen. A quilt for the back porch chair. Maybe even a dress, one with deep pockets and no apologies. I wasn't sewing for approval. I was sewing because my hands still knew how to make something whole. The garden was beginning to wake up. It started with the crocuses. Small, stubborn things that pushed through the soil with no fanfare. Then the daffodils, bold as always. And the tulips, which never came up quite where I planted them. I spent my mornings out there now. Gloves on, knees in the dirt, back aching just enough to remind me I was still here. Not useful to anyone. Just here. Living. I'd cleared out the dead things. Pruned the roses. Turned the compost. It was quiet work, and it suited me. Plants don't ask for explanations. They don't need you to justify your boundaries. They grow where there's light, and they stop when there isn't. I was learning to do the same. The house had shifted with the season, too. I opened the windows more, took down the heavy drapes and let the air move through the rooms. I didn't realize how long it had smelled like other people, like Sunday dinners I didn't want to cook, like perfumes I didn't wear, like anxiety left behind in the cushions. Now it smelled like lemon oil, soil, and something clean. I moved slowly, deliberately. Rearranged the books. Cleared out the pantry. Donated the things I no longer needed. Helen's untouched wedding china, the second blender I kept just in case, Abby's old recital shoes. Let them start their own collections now. One morning, I painted the porch chair, the same one George used to sit in while pretending to read the paper. I chose a soft, almost blue color, the kind you have to lean in to understand. When it dried, I sat in it with my tea, watching the breeze play through the trees, the sound of leaves brushing together. Not much, but enough. Across the fence, the neighbor's boy rode past on his bike. He waved. I waved back. No one asked for anything. That afternoon, I baked. Just for me. Rhubarb pie, the way my mother made it, sharp and sweet at once. I ate the first slice in silence, the second with jazz on the radio, and then I did something I hadn't done in years. I danced. Just a little. Just in the kitchen, barefoot on the cool linoleum. But it was a dance all the same, not for show, for breath. That evening, I took out George's letter again, read the last line slowly, like he was whispering it from the other room. You don't have to be the strong one all the time, but when you are, don't apologize for it. I folded the paper and placed it beside my will. Then I stood at the window and watched the first stars appear. I wasn't lonely. I wasn't waiting. I was still. And in that stillness, something was blooming, quiet, steady, and entirely mine. It was Benjamin who called, not a text, not an email, a real call, the kind where you have to sit still and be present. I was in the garden again, planting herbs this time: parsley, thyme, and basil. George used to joke that I planted like I cooked, with intention, but no precision. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I wiped my hands on my apron and answered. "Hi, Grandma," he said. His voice was quieter than usual. Not sad, exactly, just softer. "Hi, love. I just wanted to check on you." I smiled. "That's new?" He laughed. "Yeah, well, things feel different lately." I sat on the porch steps, phone tucked close, the sun warm on my neck. "What's going on?" "They're losing it," he said plainly. "Mom and Jack? Ever since the bank stuff, the trust, your will. They act like you committed a crime. They're not used to hearing no." "No," he agreed. "They're not." There was a pause. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said. "I didn't want to be in the middle." "You're not in the middle, Ben. You're on your own path. They're just upset it doesn't bend to theirs." He let that sit for a while. "I think I want to move out." My heart didn't jump the way it once would have. I just breathed in and out, careful and calm. "Do you have somewhere in mind?" "There's a place near campus, nothing fancy. A friend of mine's brother's subletting. It's small, but it's mine." "And you can afford it?" "Yeah," he said, then added, quieter. "With the trust?" "Yeah." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. "Mom said I was being manipulated," he said, almost laughing. "She said you were trying to turn me against her." "And what did you say?" "I said you were the only person who ever told me I didn't owe anyone my peace." My throat tightened. "Ben," I said, steady as I could, "whatever you choose it because it makes you feel strong, not guilty." "I will." He paused again. Then, "Can I come by?" "Always." He came that evening with a small box of books and a second-hand lamp and asked if he could leave them, just for now. I showed him the guest room, once Abby's, now clean, simple, waiting. We sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. "I think Mom's afraid," he said. "Not just of the money, but of what you changed. Like if you can stop giving, maybe she never deserved it." I looked out at the quiet street. Fear makes people selfish, but healing makes them honest. "You think she'll come around?" "I think," I said, "she'll have to decide whether silence is easier than growth." He stayed for pie, took a second slice home. When he left, he hugged me the way he always did. 2 arms, no hurry, no pretense. After he drove off, I stood at the porch rail, one hand resting on the painted wood. The stars looked a little brighter that night, not because the sky had changed, because I had. The next envelope was thicker. No return address, just my name in Helen's handwriting, rushed, uneven, like she'd gripped the pen too tightly. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the table beside my tea and went about my morning, watered the basil, swept the porch, refolded the linens in the hallway closet. I didn't avoid it out of fear. I just didn't feel obligated to rush. At noon, I sat down, slid my finger beneath the seal, and unfolded the letter. It wasn't long. Helen never was one for many words when she wasn't asking for something. "Mom, I don't know what's going on with you. I keep trying to understand, but I can't. I feel like you're punishing me for something I don't remember doing. I'm your daughter. I've tried. I've always tried. You just pulled everything away. Without warning. Without explanation. It feels cruel. We needed your help. Maybe you don't think that's love, but it was never meant to hurt you. We just assumed you wanted to help, like you always did. I don't know what this new version of you is, but I hope at some point you'll want to talk. Helen. I read it once. Then again. Then I folded it neatly and placed it back in the envelope. She wasn't sorry. She was surprised. There's a difference. The guilt was real, but it wasn't about me. It was about her losing control of a system she didn't even know she depended on. The system where I always filled in the blanks, paid the bills, made the peace, absorbed the damage. I didn't feel angry, just clear. Later that afternoon, I wrote my response. Short, precise. Helen, you weren't punished. You were uninvited. There's a difference. I gave what I gave because I wanted to. And then one day, I didn't. That day came quietly. But it came. This isn't revenge. It's release. Take care of your family. Learn what you can live without. You'll be fine. Mom. I sealed the envelope, wrote her name, and walked it to the mailbox. No return address. No decoration. Just truth. By evening, the house felt lighter again. I lit a candle and read from the old poetry book George gave me once, before everything got so loud. The words curled through the room like music. I let them. Just before bed, I passed by the mirror in the hallway. I stopped, looked, not to adjust anything, not to check for flaws, just to see myself. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't see someone surviving. I saw someone home. The days that followed were quiet, not empty, just quiet. I stopped waiting for the phone to ring. I stopped checking the window when a car passed. I stopped wondering when, or if, they'd come around. They might not. Either way, it wouldn't change me. I spent my mornings in the garden, my afternoons with thread and fabric. The quilt on the living room chair was nearly finished now. Deep blues, earthy greens, the kind of pattern you don't notice right away, but can't stop thinking about once you do. I wasn't making it for anyone else. Not this time. This one was mine. Benjamin visited every few days, not because he had to, because he wanted to. Sometimes he brought cookies, sometimes books. Sometimes we didn't talk much at all, just sat side by side on the porch, two quiet souls letting the world be what it was. He'd started looking older, not just in the face, in the eyes. There was something there now. Resolve, direction. You know, he said once, if I ever have a daughter, I'll name her after you. I smiled, brushing dirt from my palms. Don't saddle her with Margaret. He laughed. I mean the spirit. Not the name. He understood more than most people twice his age. One afternoon, I took out the old photo albums, the real ones, not the digital versions they all forgot about. I laid them out on the table and started sorting. What to keep, what to pass on, what to let go of. I kept the ones that mattered, the ones where the smiles were real, the eyes weren't tired, the moments weren't forced. The rest, I tucked away, not in anger, just in honesty. Some memories aren't worth curating. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a slice of peach pie and a single candle lit. Not for mood, for memory. George would have liked this part of me, this version. The one who no longer asked permission to be herself. I could almost hear his voice. Took you long enough, Maggie. He was right, but I got here, and that counts. The next day, I finished the quilt, folded it neatly, placed it on the chair. Then I walked to the window, looked out over the yard, and let myself feel everything. The grief of wasted years, the power of reclaimed ones, the steady, unspectacular grace of still being here. They say you can't choose your family, but you can choose your boundaries. You can choose where the giving stops and the self begins. You can choose what to carry and what to finally set down. And if you're reading this, wondering if it's too late to change, to pull back, to say no, it's not. Not if you're still breathing, not if your hands still work, not if you can still stand at the window and say, "This space is mine now." So take it, own it, and when you're ready, not a minute before, start again. But this time, for you. If this story stirred something in you, if you saw yourself in even a small part of it, share it. Leave a comment. Tell someone. Or just whisper to yourself, "I'm allowed." Because you are. Always have been.